Picture the Caribbean in 1715. Pull back from the coast of Nassau in the Bahamas, and you can see the trade routes stretching across the Atlantic like veins on a map. Gold and silver flowing out of Portobello, Panama. Sugar and rum moving north from Barbados. Silk and spices cutting across from the East Indies through the Strait of Malacca, around the Cape of Good Hope, and into European ports. Now zoom in on a single point. Right there, sitting in the shallow waters off the coast of New Providence Island, a wooden vessel with a black flag rippling in the wind. 30 cannons, 80 men, and a captain who was elected, not appointed. That ship was not some floating circus of drunk criminals swinging from ropes and yelling about treasure. It was a war machine, a business, a democracy that predated the American Constitution by 60 years. Every plank, every rope, every crew member had a specific function. And if you didn't do your job, you didn't just get fired. You got thrown overboard or marooned on an island with a single pistol and one bullet. This is how a pirate ship actually worked. Every detail explained. If you're into history that actually sounds interesting, hit subscribe. We do this every week. Let's start with what pirates actually sailed, because Hollywood got this completely wrong. Those massive galleons with towering stern castles and rows of cannons on 3 decks? Pirates almost never used those. They were too slow, too heavy, and required crews of 200 or more men just to operate. The preferred vessel of the Golden Age of Piracy, roughly 1650 to 1730, was the sloop. A sloop was small, fast, and maneuverable. It had a single mast, a shallow draft that allowed it to hide in coastal waters and river mouths, and it could outrun nearly anything the Royal Navy threw at it. Most pirate sloops carried between 60 and 80 men and maybe 8 to 12 cannons. The second most popular choice was the brigantine. 2 masts, slightly larger than a sloop, and capable of carrying more firepower. Brigantines were the sweet spot between speed and power. Bartholomew Roberts, one of the most successful pirates in history, used a brigantine for much of his career before upgrading. Then you had the frigate, which was the heavy hitter. 3 masts, 20 to 40 cannons, and room for over 100 crew members. Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge was a modified frigate, originally a French slave ship called La Concorde. He captured it, added more cannons, and turned it into one of the most feared vessels in the Atlantic. Now let's talk about the actual anatomy of the ship. The hull was the body. Built from oak or tropical hardwoods depending on where the ship was constructed, the hull had to withstand cannon fire, tropical storms, and the relentless boring of shipworms. Teredo navalis, a species of saltwater clam, would eat through a wooden hull in months if it wasn't protected. Pirates addressed this by careening, which meant beaching the ship at low tide, scraping off the barnacles and worms, and applying a coat of tar, tallow, or sulfur to the exposed wood. Some wealthier captains could afford to sheath the hull in thin copper plating, but that was rare. Above the hull sat the deck, which was divided into sections. The forecastle at the bow was where the common sailors slept and stored their gear. The quarterdeck at the stern was the command center, where the ship's wheel and compass were located. The captain and quartermaster operated from here. Below deck, you had the gun deck where the cannons were mounted, the cargo hold where supplies and stolen loot were stored, and the orlop deck at the very bottom where the surgeon did his work and the powder magazine was kept. The powder magazine was the most dangerous room on the ship. A single spark could ignite the entire store of gunpowder and blow the vessel apart. The rigging was the network of ropes and sails that made the ship move. A sloop's rigging was relatively simple, one mast with a large mainsail and a jib sail at the bow. A frigate's rigging was an engineering masterpiece, 3 masts with multiple sails on each, requiring constant adjustment based on wind direction and speed. The ropes were made from hemp or manila fiber. The sails were made from canvas, which was heavy, durable, and soaked up rain like a sponge. Every inch of this ship had a purpose. Nothing was decorative, nothing was wasted, and maintaining it was a full-time job for every person on board. Here's where pirate ships were decades ahead of their time. The captain of a pirate ship was not an absolute ruler. He was elected by a majority vote of the crew, and he could be removed by a majority vote at any time. The only moment the captain held absolute authority was during battle. Outside of combat, every major decision went to a vote. The captain's job was tactical leadership. He decided which ships to attack, when to retreat, and how to approach a target. He stood on the quarterdeck during engagements and directed the action. A good pirate captain was equal parts naval strategist and motivational speaker. He had to keep 80 violent, independent-minded men pointed in the same direction. The second most powerful person on board was not the first mate. It was the quartermaster. The quartermaster was elected separately from the captain and served as the crew's representative. He settled disputes, distributed food and loot, assigned duties, and administered punishment. If you had a problem with the captain, you went to the quartermaster. He was essentially the chief operating officer. The sailing master was the navigator. He was the man who actually knew how to read charts, use a compass, calculate latitude, and keep the ship from running aground. This was a highly specialized skill in the early 18th century. Most common sailors couldn't read, let alone perform the mathematics required for celestial navigation. A good sailing master was worth his weight in gold, sometimes literally. The boatswain, pronounced bosun, was the foreman of the deck crew. He supervised the maintenance of the ship, the rigging, the sails, and the anchors. When something broke, the boatswain organized the repair. He was also responsible for the ship's boats, the smaller launches and dinghies stored on deck and used for boarding operations or going ashore. The gunner was in charge of all weapons on board: cannons, swivel guns, muskets, pistols, cutlasses, boarding axes, and grenades. He maintained the weapons, managed the powder magazine, and trained the crew in gunnery. During battle, the gunner directed the cannon crews and calculated firing angles based on the target's distance and movement. The surgeon was often the least qualified person on the ship and also the most important when things went wrong. Most pirate surgeons had little or no formal medical training. Some were former barbers or butchers who knew how to use a saw. Their primary tools were a bone saw for amputations, a set of forceps for extracting musket balls, needle and thread for stitching wounds, and rum for anesthesia. When pirates captured a merchant ship, one of the first things they looked for was a surgeon. If the merchant vessel had one, he was often recruited, whether he wanted to join or not. The carpenter kept the ship afloat, literally. During battle, cannonballs would punch through the hull below the waterline, and the carpenter had to patch those holes while seawater poured in. He used pre-cut wooden plugs, oakum, which was tarred hemp fiber, and lead sheeting to seal breaches. Between battles, the carpenter was constantly replacing rotted planks, repairing damage from storms, and keeping the hull structurally sound. The cook was the lowest-ranking officer, if you could even call him that. On many pirate ships, the cook was a disabled crew member who could no longer fight or climb the rigging. He prepared meals in the galley, a small cooking area usually located near the bow or on the lower deck. The stove was a brick or iron firebox surrounded by sand to prevent it from setting the ship on fire. Then you had the common sailors, who made up the bulk of the crew. These men hauled ropes, climbed the rigging to adjust sails, scrubbed the deck, pumped the bilge, stood watch, and did whatever else needed doing. The work was brutal, the hours were long, and the conditions were miserable. And every single one of them had an equal vote in how the ship was run. A typical day on a pirate ship started before dawn. The morning watch, which ran from 4 a.m. to 8 a.m., was already underway. The crew operated on a 4-hour watch rotation, 4 hours on duty, 4 hours off. This cycle repeated endlessly, day and night, with no weekends and no holidays. The first order of business each morning was pumping the bilge. Every wooden ship leaked. Seawater seeped through the joints between planks, collected in the lowest part of the hull, and had to be pumped out manually using a hand-operated bilge pump. If the bilge water wasn't removed regularly, the ship would become dangerously heavy and unstable. The bilge was also where dead rats, rotting food scraps, and human waste collected, creating a smell so terrible that some sailors refused to go below deck unless absolutely necessary. Breakfast was hardtack and water. Hardtack was a type of thick, dry biscuit baked multiple times to remove all moisture. When fresh, it was merely bland and extremely hard. After a few weeks at sea, it became infested with weevils, small brown beetles that bored into the biscuit and laid eggs inside it. Experienced sailors learned to eat their hardtack in the dark so they didn't have to see what they were chewing. The main meal of the day was served around noon. It was cooked in the galley using a firebox and usually consisted of salted meat, dried peas or beans, and more hardtack. Fresh vegetables were a luxury that lasted maybe 2 weeks after leaving port before they rotted. Fresh fruit lasted even less time. Without vitamin C from fruits and vegetables, scurvy became inevitable on long voyages. Symptoms started with fatigue and sore gums, progressed to loose teeth and open sores, and ended with internal bleeding and death. Water was stored in wooden barrels that gave it a foul taste within days. To make the water drinkable, crews mixed it with rum, creating a drink called grog. The Royal Navy rationed rum at half a pint per day. Pirates were considerably less restrained. Drunkenness was so common on pirate ships that several pirate codes specifically addressed it, usually by forbidding drinking after 8 post p.m. or requiring that all drinking happen on the open deck where officers could monitor the crew. Sleeping arrangements depended on rank. The captain had a private cabin at the stern, usually furnished with a bed, a desk, and whatever luxury items he had acquired. The quartermaster sometimes had his own smaller cabin. Everyone else slept wherever they could find space. Hammocks were common, strung between the deck beams below deck. In warm weather, many sailors preferred to sleep on the open deck rather than in the stifling, stinking quarters below. Entertainment was limited. Gambling with dice and cards was popular and frequently prohibited by the ship's articles because it caused fights. Music was common. Pirates valued musicians and actively recruited them from captured ships. A fiddle player or drummer could boost morale during long stretches at sea and provide rhythm during work songs that helped coordinate group labor like hauling anchor or raising sail. Hygiene was essentially non-existent. There was no bathing. Clothes were worn until they fell apart. Lice and fleas were constant companions. The head, which was the ship's toilet, was a plank with a hole in it, mounted at the bow of the ship, hanging over the open water. Privacy did not exist on a pirate vessel. This was the reality of life at sea in the early 1700s. It was cramped, dirty, dangerous, and monotonous. The stretches between captures could last weeks or months, during which the crew did nothing but maintain the ship, stand watch, and wait. Finding your way across an ocean in 1715 was a problem that had killed more sailors than combat ever did. There was no GPS. There were no reliable clocks. Maps were incomplete, inaccurate, and sometimes deliberately falsified by rival nations trying to mislead competitors. Pirates navigated using 3 primary methods. The first was dead reckoning. The sailing master would estimate the ship's current position based on its last known position, its speed, the direction it was traveling, and the elapsed time. Speed was measured using a chip log, a triangular piece of wood tied to a rope with knots spaced at regular intervals. A sailor would throw the chip log overboard and count how many knots paid out in a set period of time, usually 30 seconds measured with a sand glass. That's where the term knots for nautical speed comes from. The second method was celestial navigation. By measuring the angle between the horizon and the sun at noon, using a cross staff or later a backstaff, the sailing master could calculate the ship's latitude, its north-south position. Longitude, the east-west position, was the unsolvable problem of the age. There was no reliable method for determining longitude at sea until John Harrison invented the marine chronometer in the 1760s, well after the Golden Age of Piracy had ended. This meant that pirates could know how far north or south they were, but they often had no precise idea how far east or west they had traveled. The third method was coastal piloting. When near land, sailors used landmarks, depth soundings with a lead line, and local knowledge to navigate. Experienced Caribbean pirates memorized the locations of reefs, sandbars, channels, and safe harbors throughout the islands. This local knowledge was a massive tactical advantage. A pirate who knew where the shallow water was could lead a pursuing warship straight onto a reef and watch it run aground. Now, how did pirates actually find ships to rob? They didn't just sail around randomly hoping to bump into someone. They knew the trade routes. Spanish treasure fleets sailed from Havana to Seville along predictable paths dictated by wind patterns and ocean currents. Merchant ships from the American colonies traveled established lanes between ports like Boston, Charleston, and the Sugar Islands. Slave ships followed the triangle trade route between West Africa, the Caribbean, and Europe. Pirates positioned themselves along these routes at choke points where ships had no choice but to pass. The windward passage between Cuba and Hispaniola was a prime hunting ground. The waters off Madagascar in the Indian Ocean caught ships rounding the Cape of Good Hope. The Carolina coast was a favorite for pirates targeting colonial trade. Lookouts stationed in the crow's nest at the top of the mainmast scanned the horizon constantly. They could spot a sail at roughly 12 to 15 miles on a clear day. Once a potential target was identified, the captain made a decision: chase or let it go. The decision depended on the target's size, speed, likely cargo, and the number of guns visible on its deck. If the decision was to attack, the chase could last hours or even days. Pirates had one crucial advantage in these pursuits. Their ships were designed for speed and carried minimal cargo, making them lighter and faster than the loaded merchant vessels they were hunting. Pirate combat was nothing like the broadside-to-broadside slugfests you see in movies. Pirates avoided prolonged gun battles whenever possible. Every cannonball that hit a target ship was potentially destroying cargo they wanted to steal. Every exchange of fire risked casualties they couldn't afford to replace. The ideal pirate engagement was one where no shots were fired at all. The strategy worked like this. A pirate ship would approach its target flying a false flag, usually the flag of a friendly nation. Merchant captains were accustomed to encountering other ships at sea and wouldn't immediately become suspicious. As the pirate ship closed the distance, the crew would be below deck, hidden from view, armed and ready. When the pirate ship was within effective range, usually 100 to 200 yards, the Jolly Roger went up. The false flag came down and the black flag replaced it. At the same moment, the gun ports opened, revealing a row of loaded cannons, and the hidden crew appeared on deck, brandishing weapons. This was the critical moment. The pirate captain was counting on the merchant crew to surrender immediately, and most of the time, they did. Merchant sailors were poorly paid, often mistreated by their captains, and had zero loyalty to the cargo they were transporting. They had no reason to die fighting for someone else's profits. If the target refused to surrender, things escalated fast. The first volley was usually aimed at the rigging, not the hull. Chain shot, 2 cannonballs connected by a chain would shred sails and snap mast stays, crippling the target's ability to maneuver or flee. Bar shot, a cannonball with an iron bar through it, served a similar purpose. Grape shot was the anti-personnel round, a canvas bag filled with musket balls that turned the cannon into a giant shotgun. Fired at a crowded deck from close range, grape shot was devastating. Once the target was crippled, the pirates moved aboard. The helmsman would bring the pirate ship alongside the target. Grappling hooks, iron hooks on the end of ropes, were thrown across to bind the 2 ships together. Then the boarding party went over the side. The first men across were the shock troops. They carried grenades, crude iron or glass spheres filled with gunpowder and scrap metal with a lit fuse. These were thrown onto the target's deck to create chaos and force the defenders to scatter. Smoke pots made from tar and sulfur were also used to reduce visibility and make breathing difficult. Behind the grenade throwers came the main assault force, armed with cutlasses, boarding axes, pistols, and blunderbusses. The cutlass was the preferred close combat weapon because its short, heavy blade was effective in the cramped quarters of a ship's deck without getting tangled in the rigging overhead. Pistols were single-shot weapons that took 30 seconds or more to reload, so pirates carried multiple pistols, fired them once, and then drew their blades. The fighting was close, fast, and extremely violent. Most boarding actions were over within minutes. Merchant crews who chose to fight usually realized very quickly that they were outmatched and surrendered. After taking the ship, the pirates got to work. The cargo hold was opened and everything of value was cataloged. Gold and silver were the top prizes, but pirates also valued navigational instruments, medical supplies, weapons, ammunition, food, rum, sails, rope, and skilled crew members willing to join. If the captured crew had fought back, the consequences were severe. Captains who resisted were sometimes tortured, hanged from the yardarm, or set adrift in an open boat. This served a strategic purpose. Word traveled fast in the shipping lanes. A captain who heard that pirates tortured captains who resisted was far more likely to surrender without a fight. The pirates' greatest weapon wasn't the cannon. It was reputation. This might be the most surprising part of how pirate ships worked. They had constitutions, written documents called Articles of Agreement that every crew member signed or marked with an X before the ship left port. These weren't vague guidelines. They were specific, detailed contracts that governed every aspect of life on board. Every pirate crew drafted its own articles, but they shared common elements across the Caribbean. Bartholomew Roberts, who captured over 400 ships during his career, had one of the most detailed sets of articles ever recorded. His rules covered everything from lights-out time to the penalty for bringing a woman on board disguised as a man. Compensation was laid out precisely. The captain received 2 shares of any prize. The quartermaster received 1.5 shares. The gunner, boatswain, and sailing master each received 1.25 shares. Common sailors received 1 share each. The surgeon received additional compensation for maintaining the medicine chest. Disability payments were standard. A crew member who lost a right arm in battle received 600 pieces of 8, roughly equivalent to 6 years of a merchant sailor's wages. A left arm was worth 500 pieces of 8. A right leg was 500. A left leg was 400. Loss of an eye or a finger had its own payout. These disability provisions predated any national workers' compensation program by over a century. The articles also covered behavior. Gambling was prohibited on many ships. Lights and candles had to be extinguished by 8 Mahos p.m. Weapons were required to be kept clean and ready for service at all times. Desertion during battle was punishable by death or marooning. Theft from fellow crew members was punished by slitting the offender's nose or ears and then setting him ashore. Disputes between crew members were settled by the quartermaster. If the quartermaster couldn't resolve the conflict, the 2 parties were allowed to settle it on shore with pistols or swords, but never on the ship where the fighting could damage the vessel or endanger others. This system was radically democratic for its time. In an era when the Royal Navy flogged sailors for minor offenses and merchant captains held absolute power, pirate ships operated on majority rule, elected leadership, written contracts, and compensation for workplace injuries. Historians have noted that pirate governance resembled a constitutional republic more than it resembled anything else operating on the world's oceans in the early 18th century. So how much did pirates actually make? The answer is that it varied wildly, but when things went right, the payoff was enormous compared to legitimate employment. A common sailor in the Royal Navy earned roughly 19 shillings per month in 1720. A merchant sailor earned slightly more, around 25 to 55 shillings, depending on the route and the cargo. For comparison, a successful pirate raid could net each crew member anywhere from 100 to 1,000 pounds in a single haul. That's the equivalent of 10 to 20 years of legitimate wages in a single afternoon. The biggest individual haul of the Golden Age went to Henry Every, also known as Long Ben. In 1695, Every captured the Mughal ship Ganges Sawai in the Indian Ocean. The treasure on board included gold, silver, ivory, and jewels worth an estimated 600,000 pounds. Each crew member received a share worth roughly 1,000 pounds, a staggering fortune for a common sailor. But those legendary hauls were the exception. The daily reality of piracy was much less glamorous. Many raids yielded only food, rum, rope, and canvas, things that were useful but not exactly retirement money. Pirates could go weeks or months between profitable captures, during which they were burning through their supplies and earning nothing. When a prize was taken, the quartermaster oversaw the division. The cargo was inventoried, valued, and divided according to the shares laid out in the articles. Loot was distributed on the spot, often on the deck of the captured ship. There was no central treasury. Each man kept his own share. This immediate distribution explains one of the great puzzles of pirate history. Why did they spend it all so fast? When a pirate ship hit port, the crew would blow through months of earnings in days on alcohol, gambling, and prostitutes. The answer is simple. They had no safe way to store wealth, no access to banks, and no guarantee they'd live long enough to spend it later. The average career of a Golden Age pirate lasted about 2 years before ending in death, capture, or retirement. Spending the money immediately was the rational choice when tomorrow was never guaranteed. The ocean killed more pirates than the gallows ever did. Scurvy was the slow killer. Without fresh fruits and vegetables, the body's vitamin C reserves depleted within 4 to 6 weeks. The gums would swell and bleed. Old wounds reopened, bones became brittle. Left untreated, scurvy was fatal. The Royal Navy didn't mandate citrus rations until 1795, decades after the Golden Age ended. Pirates had no such regulations and suffered accordingly. Dysentery from contaminated water and spoiled food killed entire crews. Yellow fever and malaria were endemic in the Caribbean and took a constant toll. Typhus, spread by the lice that infested every ship, caused high fevers, delirium, and death. Battle injuries were treated with the tools available, which weren't much. Amputations were performed with a bone saw, no anesthesia beyond rum, and no understanding of infection. The wound was cauterized with hot tar to stop the bleeding. Survival rates were grim, but those who survived an amputation often continued sailing. The surgeon's chest, when a ship was lucky enough to have one, contained lancets for bloodletting, forceps, tourniquets, suture needles, and a collection of herbal remedies that may or may not have done anything useful. Mercury was used to treat syphilis, which caused its own set of devastating side effects, including madness and organ failure. Death at sea was handled simply. The body was sewn into a hammock or canvas shroud with a cannonball at the feet to ensure it sank and committed to the ocean. There was no ceremony beyond what the captain or quartermaster chose to say. In warm waters, bodies had to be disposed of quickly before decomposition made conditions unbearable for the living crew. So that's how a pirate ship actually worked. Not the romanticized version from movies and theme parks, but the real, filthy, violent, democratic, and surprisingly organized operation that terrorized the world's oceans for nearly a century. Every rope had a purpose. Every man had a role. Every decision was governed by written rules that the entire crew agreed to follow. They elected their leaders, compensated their injured, distributed their wealth equally, and maintained a floating society that functioned far better than its reputation suggests. The Golden Age of Piracy lasted roughly 80 years. In that time, these men, and a few women like Anne Bonny and Mary Read, built something that was equal parts criminal enterprise and social experiment. If you want to see how the most feared pirates of all time met their end, from Blackbeard's last stand to Bartholomew Roberts catching a cannonball to the throat, that video is on screen now. Subscribe for more history that Hollywood got wrong.